All right. Well, John, it's so nice to finally meet you. I've been following you for a while, and thanks for coming on Lunch Therapy.
Yeah, of course.
So, before we get into your psychology and your lunch, we were just tweeting because I just tweeted a little bit about lettuce and how I don't always wash my lettuce. And you said you wash your lettuce with soap and water.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Was that like a post-COVID thing, or was that a
I've done it
pre-COVID
for
thing?
years. Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know where I have like very uneven views on like hygiene and cleanliness. Um, so like yeah, so there's that. But I feel like it's one of those things where like the kind of manufactured demand of like seeing like fruit and vegetable wash at like
Hmm.
Whole Foods in like 2009 um sort of created that idea, and then I realized that like it's just diluted soap, and so like a lot of times like with lettuce like there's lots of like sand, and like with greens like it can be a little dicey, and so I just started doing it like I chop the lettuce or whatever, kale or whatever leafy thing, and just put it in like the salad spinner, and then fill the salad spinner with water, and then like usually I just run the tip of the soap bottle underneath the water to like just rinse off some of the soap. So that's like literally like a dash of soap,
Okay.
and then just like giving it a little hand agitation, and then just like rinse it a few times, and it's always like sparkly and clean, and I think it tastes better.
Wow. I
Um,
mean, also, it's like lettuce has been the source of E. coli and all kinds of
exactly.
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not crazy that
Yeah.
you're doing that. But it's funny because, like, for me, it's like when the box says like triple washed, or if I get it from a
Oh,
farmer's
that stuff
market,
I don't watch. Yeah.
oh, it's just a final
If it's
wash. Yeah.
washed, but if it's like the romaine hearts or anything where if it doesn't say washed on it, then yeah, I'll do that. But if it's the washed thing, then I usually don't bother.
Oh, you don't bother. Okay. Because I get it from these guys at the farmer's market who assure me that it's very clean lettuce, and I trust them. And it's also like, when you think about like chefs handling your food in a restaurant, to me that there's not a huge difference between like a farmer picking lettuce and washing it and putting it in a bag, and a chef like grabbing lettuce out of a bowl and putting it on a plate.
Right. Yeah. And also like my mom had this phrase, she said like it's clean dirt.
Oh, interesting. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Connecticut. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm so curious to hear. I mean, we're going to get into your whole psychology and your career and stuff, but just to get started with the whole drinks of it all. I mean, you are a cocktail guru, and I'm curious, how did you get started in the world of cocktails?
Really randomly, actually. It was not. I went to like I went to Columbia. I was like thinking I'm gonna go to law school. I was like prepping for my LSATs. I worked for the city for 2 years as investigator, um, investigating misconduct allegations against the police. So I was like on the kind of like the white collar, like Greenwich kid, like life track.
Hmm.
And then my friend Don Lee, who we lived in the same apartment for a few years in college, he's this like you talk about cocktail guru. He's like the guru of gurus, um, and he was part of the opening team for PDT, which is this speakeasy in the East Village.
I tried
And
to
I
go there
went.
so many times and never got in. That's the one with the
It's
phone
tough.
booth, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's small and
Yes.
there's no standing, and so it's just like a volume thing. Um, and although now they're on Resi, I heard, which is way different from the literal pen and paper that we used when I was there. Uh, um, and so I went a few times, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so cool. I had taken the Columbia University bartending course, which was like kind of a joke. But I got to drink for free on a Thursday night when I was a freshman, so that was fun. Um, and so I kind of knew a little bit about making drinks. I always was into cooking. Like my mom was a big kind of like Martha Stewart clone sort of
Hmm.
vibe, and very like lots of cooking and hosting and entertaining. Um, so it always kind of like it was not super foreign to me, but I never actually considered it professionally. And then, yeah, I went to Japan for a couple of months with a friend of mine to kind of do like some English teaching in the typical like early 20s post-college kind of travel mentality. And I came back, I didn't have a job, and I sort of asked everyone I knew ever if I could work with or for them or if they knew anyone. And sure enough, I asked Don and he was like, sure, why not? And I'm like, okay, like, and so I didn't really have a lot of, I had literally zero experience as a bartender. And fortunately, I got to train with Don and a lot of the other bartenders who were there. So it was kind of I wasn't totally, just set to the wolves to crash and burn. So I did a few training shifts there, and then I kind of got sort of hired officially by Jim Meehan, who went on to become an owner, and then it just sort of spiraled out of control. Like I got, maybe within a couple of months of me working there, I was sort of obliquely mentioned by Julia Moskin in one of her like critics journals, and it was like the best euphemism for gay that I've ever heard. She referred to me as a courtly bartender, which I love.
I want to be
like,
a courtly bartender.
Is he courtly?
It sounds like a Beethoven like song
exactly.
for the piano. The courtly bartender. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. And then like a couple of months later, I was like quoted, and I had a picture in the New York Times, and it was like, whoa, like this is like just sort of one of those things that really just clicked when it happened. And I had been working as like a bureaucrat for the city for 2 years, and it was kind of a bleak job, and it was a lot of work that you would sort of send off into the ether, and not a lot would happen, or people would just be upset with you because it's really hard to prove allegations of misconduct against the police.
Sure.
Believe it or not. Yeah. And so it was cool to be able to do something that was real, where you'd be able to like have a person sit in front of you, you'd like talk to them, you'd create something for them out of, not thin air, but you'd construct this thing for them that only was valid for like, the immediate period of time that you were constructing it, and they would eat it and drink it, and they would, their state would change. They'd be happy, they'd be, inspired, or the alcohol probably didn't hurt either. But it was like a really great, like tangible way to like to have a job, and then they paid you. Like that was like, it was just like it happened, and you could walk away, and it was done. And I sort of didn't look back. And then a couple years later, maybe like 1 or 2 years later, at the time I was like balancing like an office job, and so which was a kind of a hectic schedule. And then I quit the office job, and then I got a job bartending at Momofuku Sambar. So I was like twice a week between there and PDT. And then gradually I transitioned from working behind the bar at Sambar to sort of a part-time, like semi-part-time like bar director. And then it sort of, that became full-time bar director in 2013. So I opened 10 restaurants for the restaurant group, and I oversaw the bar programs, trained staff, trained people who trained people, trained the managers. So that's what kind of like made it easy for me to write a book that was for teaching people how to think about drinks from square one. Because a lot of times you would take just raw talent, just like, build them up as bartenders. So yeah, that's the kind of drink trajectory.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Well,
I have so many questions, but I think the best way to start is just to ask the big question, which is, what did you have for lunch today?
Today I had, it's funny because I my eating pattern is pretty odd when I'm alone. I generally just eat like what I eat, like ingredient. I snack a lot, so so today like I had the fact that I took frozen peas and I thawed them, and then I put on this like I tried to make like this like vegan bucatini what's that word, a frittata last night, which turned out very tasty. But like I used this fake egg stuff. That's sort of this like scrambled egg in a bottle. That's actually really good, but I didn't use enough of it, so it kind of just fell apart. It didn't like hold its like frittata cakey shape. It was just sort of like baked pasta, which was really good. So then I put that on top of it and I microwaved it again. And so that was my composed. That's a very composed lunch as far as I'm concerned. Whereas usually I'll eat I'll have like a handful of walnuts and then like a grapefruit and then like 4 tofu hot dogs with ketchup.
Yeah, you mentioned tofu hot dogs in your email.
I eat a
was
lot of
kind of
hot dogs. Yeah.
hoping for a tofu hot dog diagnosis. But if I have to like sum up your lunch, it was thawed peas with a heated up leftover bucatini frittata on top.
Yeah. And the bucatini frittata had broccoli, red peppers, jalapeno, like, interspersed.
Got it. So when you cook savory food or you cook for yourself, do you approach it the same way you approach a cocktail?
No, not at all.
What's the difference?
For me, I don't. I guess it kind of, yes, in a way, because it's like if I would never just like sit at home and be like, oh, I want a Negroni, and just like make a Negroni for myself. Like I would have like a beer or like just like gin and ice. I don't care enough about my own. Like I'm not trying to impress myself, so I just really, it's all about kind of functionality and like convenience. So like I usually like cook for my husband, and we do have like meals, like normal people. But when I'm like alone, this devolves really quickly into like half a box of Oreos and like cashews, and like real like college kid shit. But yeah.
Well, it makes me think that you really enjoy serving others, like, or taking care of others.
Yeah, for sure.
Because even when you described like bartending, you were saying that like to give somebody that pleasure, to give somebody that moment was what you're about. And then when it comes to feeding yourself, it's sort of like not a high priority for you.
Dirtbag central. Absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. But that's really, but I think that makes a lot of sense for people who are in the service industry or who, I feel like I'm the same way. Like it's very similar. Like when I'm home alone, like I'll just eat like beans and rice or something like really simple. And when my husband's here, I'll like go all out. But I also thought it was really interesting that you said you wouldn't make a cocktail for yourself. So the cocktail stuff is really reserved for like your profession and not like your hobby.
Yeah. I guess it would be different if I didn't have kind of professional encouragement to develop drinks. I have, I do writing, I develop recipes, I have consulting clients. And so I have kind of like, I'm sort of not forced to do it because I enjoy it, but there's like a reason to do it beyond just my own enjoyment. Like I'm not just curious about something. It'll always be in the context of like work. So yeah, I will make a drink for myself, but it will be, okay, well, let's evaluate like this recipe, or I need to do XYZ for a client. So let's do that. So I have enough of an outlet, I guess, whereas I don't really need to satisfy my curiosity, because it's just part of my life anyway.
Well, it's funny because when I go on vacation with friends, they're all like, oh, what are you going to cook for us? Like, and it's like, no, like that's what I do all day, in my normal life. So I totally get that. Like when you're home, it's like the last thing you want to do is the thing you do at work. But I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you is when you said you started working at PDT and you didn't know anything, like what were the things you initially learned that set you up to have this career? Like what about your mentorship or like the things that you were taught were specific and helpful along the way?
Well, I think there's two sides to it. One, I think that studying at Columbia, which it has this core curriculum where they basically like you're compelled to read like all the classics and like this art stuff and sort of like basic kind of like humanities, et cetera, et cetera. It's very kind of Western focused still, but you have to read all the classics and everything. And all throughout those classes, like there were core classes, and everyone, wasn't, so everyone kind of knew what the deal was. And the teachers would always be like, oh, like you're going to be a doctor or whatever. And this isn't really that important to you to like know what Hume said, but like you'll be great at cocktail parties. And then sure enough, like I actually a professional cocktail party person.
Right.
But it also taught me that, you have to like, it taught me how to like read quickly and study, because you're just like, you have all this coursework on top of your like major or whatever. So you have to be really efficient in terms of like studying and being able to learn like deeper structures so that you can apply specific knowledge on top of that in a lot more easy way, rather than kind of learning these isolated bits of information and trying to piece together. You kind of like, it makes a lot of sense to front load a lot of studying so that you have an easier time learning. So I applied that to bartending. And so pretty much as soon as I realized, I'm also like a really anxious person and I have tons of performance anxiety. So like everything I can do to prepare. So I think almost like maybe I was like reading like Gary Reagan's Joy of Mixology, like on the walk home from my first like training shift. And then just like read every book I could, you know, like Imbibe, The Joy of Mixology, David Embry's book, like every bar book. I mean, in fact, this was like 10 years ago, so there were plenty, but there weren't as many as there are now. So I just read and studied. I had flashcards, like
Really? What were on your flashcards? Like, what would they say?
Like the recipes for the drinks, like
okay,
yeah. And also I think that, I don't know, maybe I also like going to a college where you have to, you know, you're forced to engage with classes that you may not have prepared for, is that it's really, really good at like confidently saying things that you don't you don't really know like fully are aware if it's true. So people will come in early on and they'd be like, hey, like, can I get a Sazerac? And that word was new for me. And instead of being like, oh, I don't know, I'd be like, yeah, totally, fuck yeah, I love that drink. And then I just like sort of discreetly like go to the bartender next to me and be like, what's a Sazerac? and then yeah, so the confidence, you know, a little bit of like unearned confidence was also very helpful for me. And for some reason, like I have like lots of like stage fright and like anticipatory anxiety for like performing, but then when I'm actually in the moment, it's totally fine. And my friends are always like, John, you're this person who's like in the corner at a party, like petting the person's cat who you don't even know. Like, and you're this like gregarious like bartender who's like Mr. Man. And I'm like, I can't explain it either. So I think there's also another thing that appealed to me about it is that it sort of like turned on this like other mode for me.
It's funny, like our last guest or two guests ago was this stand-up comedian, Zach Schiffman, who lives in Brooklyn, and he had a very similar thing to say, which is that he's kind of private about like his sex life and stuff, but when he gets on stage and does stand-up comedy, he's an open book. It just all comes out of him. And it sounds like for you, like being a bartender is like the stage for you, where like you get to share this other side of yourself. Well, I have to say, this is a sidebar, this is my own therapy, but I'm very triggered by your Columbia experience, because that was my early decision school. And this was like in 1997. And I remember Barbara Streisand's movie, The Mirror Has Two Faces, came out, which is when she played a Columbia professor who teaches a class on like sex and romance. And it made Columbia look so beautiful. And I was so excited to go there. And then I got rejected early. Like I just like completely. So yeah, I'm very jealous that you had this wonderful education. But what was I going to say?
It was my early days in school too. I gambled it all on Columbia.
Well, I'm very envious. Well, I was going to say, I mean, one of the really interesting things about you, I feel like as you talk about like your personality and you talk about confidence or being shy or being outgoing, it's like your public persona, from what I've seen, like from like Instagram and stuff like that, would make me think that you were like the most outrageous, like larger than life, like the last person to be petting the cat at the party. Like, so it's just funny because like there's something tension there.
Yeah. I mean, I think also that's like how different I am now than I was 10 years ago too. Like I feel like if you saw pictures of me from 10 years ago, you'd just be like, who is this person? And it's sort of, I feel like I've been the same person. I feel like I've been like an old person for so long as I can remember, but I also feel like there's some sort of semi-superficial aspects of my personality that are like radically different. And like kind of not giving a fuck in a kind of a, I don't want to say like in like a recklessness or like careless kind of way, but kind of in a it's almost like a thrill to take risks kind of way.
Sure.
And so just like doing outrageous shit and like being stupid is fun,
Yeah.
and you can get away with it, and then it becomes this sort of like weird addiction.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. What was I just reading or something about like, I'm reading the Mike Nichols biography, and they're talking about the movie Wolf that he did with Jack Nicholson, and he was trying to understand the central metaphor of the movie because he felt like werewolves were not a good metaphor for the human experience. And somebody was trying to explain it to him that like, a werewolf represents like your id coming out and just like your pure,
Yeah.
just like so as you were describing that, I totally get that. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you was about mixology and cocktails. As somebody who went to Columbia and like clearly likes to think deeply about things, like what is it about cocktails that sustains you, or like that you still find fascinating, or like what's the depth or like the complexity to it that makes you interested in it?
I think for me, it's about um, there's a lot. I mean, I think there's a few things, but like I think the top two that come to mind are like the transformational aspects of making drinks, and I think that's also very true of cooking, where you're applying kind of like intention and planning to something, to ingredients, to transform them into something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really fascinating to me because it's just it's the creative act,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And then also there's just, it's very um, like multidisciplinary, not to be like
Uh-huh.
too, dorky about it, but like, there's so many different little rabbit holes to jump down. There's like distillation and spirits, and that whole element of it. But then there's like, you can go into the supply chain and ingredients, and how the farming conditions are affecting the ultimate product. And then there's also just like the history of the cultural history of these things, and why gin tastes the way it does, and
Mm-hmm.
what are these sort of like like anthropological factors that go into why bourbon is defined the way it is. So it's just a very rich kind of like topic.
Mm-hmm.
And there, yeah, and I think that because I think that like as opposed to another beverage category, I think probably coffee is the closest. But like, if you think about like beer or wine, like the person who is serving the beer or wine, they're kind of transmitting something, and there's a lot of skill and expertise, and whatever, it's very like very like valid thing. But for me personally, to be able to put my own kind of authorship on the end result is always like
Mm-hmm.
kind of the thing. And I was always like I would make like weird like baked goods when I was 5 years old. I was always like kind of into like tinkering and messing with things, and um like making stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
That
it's
makes a
that
lot of
kind of
sense.
tactile
Yeah.
creation thing that you can, it's sort of like it brings together like the cool parts of a lot of different things, like cooking and wine and producing of beverages, and you kind of braid everything together in a way that's really um, kind of endlessly rich.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. I think that's true for me in cooking. Like, I feel like because I love to read and I love books, and I feel like
Yeah.
with cooking, it was the first time I could take something I was reading in a book and like make it tangible. Like I could read
Hmm.
like a Marcella Hazan recipe that she wrote like 50 years ago, and then suddenly be in the kitchen and like tasting that same combination.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's an endless variety. So I'm curious, like, do you remember like when you were out creating your own cocktails, because you talked about the act of creation, like do you remember like the first cocktail that you came up with that was an original, or that was original to you?
Well, I mean, well, so actually the first, this is going back to like my college days. Trying to think if there's anything in high school. No, high school, I don't think I did anything. I think I just drank uh, Kahlua. But I like the first cocktail I can remember making is actually like a grasshopper. And we watched out in college, and we watched like Barbarella. Like grasshopper is like cream and creme de menthe, and I think there's some gin in there, maybe vodka. Um, which is like, those kinds of like ridiculous drinks always so appeal to me. I did do some like, I don't even remember what it was, but there was some sort of turmeric drink that I did when I before I started bartending. I was based on something, I don't know, but actually the first cocktail I tried to create at PDT was like actually undrinkable, and it was like this very interesting lesson of just like you can't go in without a plan. And so I just sort of like walked behind the bar and was like, I'm gonna make a drink, and like just pulled like 2 or 3 ingredients and was like, let's just put all these together and see what happens. And it was just like not good. And what led me to like actually making my first cocktail, which is has appeared on the menu at PDT for a few times, but it was called the Norman Inversion. And it's basically a French 75 with apple schnapps, orange bitters, and Norman apple cider.
Yeah.
And that lesson, that was the result of a lesson for me that I got from Jim Meehan, where it's kind of like, look, it's not really about just inventing a whole new drink out of nothing that it has no relationship to anything else. It's about you're seeing these repeating structures in cocktails. I think that's another thing that's so fascinating to me about it, is that it's like kind of similar to like music or writing, where it's like even cooking. It's like a sandwich, like has a it's like a sandwich structure. Like there's like generally 2 pieces of bread, and then there's some kind of like leafy thing, and there's some kind of sauce, and there's a thing, and so it's like you're not going to make a sandwich out of like watermelon rinds, like that's just absurd. Like maybe you could, someone could, but like that's just not normal. Like you basically want to like work within these established frameworks because they allow you to like rely on structures that work, but then still be able to apply your own creativity to it. And like songs, like chorus, bridge, whatever.
Oh yeah, even like storytelling is like
exactly
that too.
Yeah, like beginning, middle, and end, and like the hero's journey or whatever. And so then I was like, oh cool, so I'm gonna find drinks that I like, and then I'm gonna like find out why they work and how they're good, and then apply my own creativity to that, rather than trying to just invent a new structure of cocktails, which is just like you could do, but maybe if you've been bartending for 3 months, you should dial it down a notch. So the Norman Inversion was my first drink, and it has this like
it also fits sort of like the whole literary thing that you were talking about at Columbia. It's like, because there's a play on words there. It's like Norman Invasion, Norman Inversion, and then like Normandy is like an apple region. So it's like there's a lot of language in there too that you're playing with. So that's kind of cool.
And there's actually like beyond that, there's like a family connection too. Like I have this like absurdly like long genealogy, and one of my ancestors was in the Battle of Hastings.
Wow.
So it's like there's like a weird like Welsh castle that's like basically a pile of rocks that I'm like somehow vaguely connected to. So it was also a callback to that.
So when you like came up with that combination, because I'm thinking about it, it's like you said apple brandy or apple schnapps?
Apple schnapps, yeah.
So you had that apple flavor, and then like you added the bitters to kind of give it like a little complexity, and then the cider was to like reinforce the apple flavor, or to kind of give it
so it's a substitute. So basically it's like the French 75 is like gin, lemon juice, and like sparkling wine, like champagne. And so the champagne is sparkling, obviously, so you just sub that out for the cider, and then the gin stays the same, and then rather than using citrus, you use the apple brandy as a sweetener, where usually there'd be simple syrup in the French 75. So it's sort of like, it's called the Mr. Potato Head method, like officially. So you'll see like, what's the base spirit of its gin? That means you can maybe sub out for something else, and like, what's the sweetener? And you kind of like rejigger everything.
So when that
within this.
So when that debuted at PDT, like, were you like, was it like opening night of a Broadway show where you're like, who's gonna order this? And were you like watching people drink it and see like, what do they think? Like, is this good? Is it popular? Like, was that what you was going through your head?
I don't know if I had it. I don't know if I have any like specific memory of that, but that's definitely how I would have felt. Like seeing the menu printed, and there's a little like annotated spiel for the drink. Yeah.
That's so cool. So I mean, I'm curious, like if you were to go to somebody's house and they were to make you a cocktail, or like if you were just observed like an average cocktail maker at home, like what are the things that you would notice, or the are like pet peeves, or just general things that people do when they're making cocktails that you think they could do better, or that bartenders do, or someone like mixologists do that are more skillful or so?
Actually, the thing I think that a lot of people, that kind of doesn't bother me per se, but it definitely, like, I wish people wouldn't, they would, I feel like people try to compare themselves to the drinks that they had at
Mm-hmm.
these, amazing world-class places, and they kind of try to do too much,
Mm-hmm.
and they get discouraged, or they're like really scared to, like, oh, do you think this would be, a lot of times people are like, oh, like, hey John, like, I have these two things, like, do you think they'll be good together? And I'm like, I have no fucking clue, like, just try it. Like you're probably not gonna make like a lethal poison, so like, yeah, sure, like, give it a try. Like, that's you, like,
Right.
it's so rarely people, you can tell that it's less about actual feedback on, like, oh, well, I think that the spirit and this thing won't be congruous or whatever, and actually giving analytical feedback, and more people just looking for permission,
Mm-hmm.
for just to experiment and to fail. Because, like, if you think about these cocktails that are on these menus, like, some of these drinks, my own personal experience, or being around other people who are developing them, there's like 15, 20 shitty versions of that drink that you didn't taste until
Mm-hmm.
you
Right.
arrived at the menu. So take it kind of easy. I think a lot of people need to take it a little bit easier on themselves, at least
Mm-hmm.
to start.
And you're talking about inventing a cocktail, but like, what about like if I was to like make a Manhattan at home and I wanted to make it as good as the one I would get at like PDT or Momofuku or somewhere, like is
I think that the same thing applies. I think a lot of times, like, so much of what the experience is like the actual, like, I think that any kind of culinary experience in hospitality is like 30% the ingredients and 70% everything else. So
mm,
the fact that someone else isn't making it for you is also, kind of like, the sandwich that you make for yourself never really is as good as the one
oh wow, yeah.
that you make, that someone makes for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of surprise. It's also just nice not to do work. And then the glassware, and
Yes.
is the ice the same, and how fresh is your bottle of vermouth? Do you have
Mm-hmm.
the same cherries, or is the peel, the little, garnish as beautifully made as it is? And so it's sort of like, I feel like there's like a casualness that
Mm-hmm.
I like to approach with at home drinking, that I would never necessarily tolerate at like a fancy cocktail bar. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that definitely, yeah, like, it's sort of like you're at home, like, you're, even if you're, I mean, if you're like having some, like, heads of state dinner, maybe you'd want to like go a little, get a little fancy. But even when you have friends over for a dinner party, it's always more casual,
Do you know
and
Ben
more personal.
Mims, the
Oh
food
yeah,
writer?
absolutely,
So
yes.
Ben had us over recently and he made a cocktail, or his partner made a cocktail, and they had gotten ice cubes from the store that they live
Yeah,
really close to the store that sells like nice ice cubes, and it made such a difference. I was so
it does.
impressed when
Yeah,
they served the cocktail. It was like a big cube and I was like, wow, that's so
yeah,
fancy. And it was all it was just a different ice cube. So well, I was going to ask you, when you
exactly.
go to a restaurant, like a hip new restaurant, if you were like in LA and you went to like Bestia, or that's not new, but like Bavel or something, I'm just using LA as a reference because I live here. Like, and you were looking at the cocktail list and you wanted to order something to check it out. Like, what do you gravitate to? Like, what do you normally look for on a cocktail list if you want to try out someone else's work?
It really depends. To be perfectly honest, like, I rarely crave cocktails outside, like, at all. Honestly, like, it's just like, it feels like work.
Right. That's
So
interesting. Okay.
if I go to a place where it's not really like, if I go to a place and it's like a friend is working there, or I know, there's some backstory, there's a connection to, and I want to be able to like provide feedback or understand, someone's point of view, then I'll definitely look to the menu. and it's so hard to evaluate drinks based on how the menu is constructed. So I usually I'm one of those people who looked at the menu for like 4 seconds and I'm just like, okay, like that's good.
Yes, that's what I do
And
too.
just pick
Yeah.
something. I'm like, I don't care. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna agonize over it. I'm not gonna ask any questions. Like just whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like just give me like, okay, that and that done. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
usually just sort of wing it and just sort of see what happens, rather than trying to overly manage the experience or overthink it too much.
Mhm.
As a kind of a blank slate and a sort of a kind of a secret shopper kind of mentality to it, also. But like my own personal preferences are usually something that's like kind of a little bit more like refreshing and like fruity, tropical, like
Yeah, me too.
like acidity. But I've gotten to the point, I think, where in a lot of aspects of my life, it's just like kind of my own subjective enjoyment is like not really that important. And a lot of times I'll have a lot of fun and enjoy myself at like very bad restaurants where there's like
Yes,
it's just a shit show. And you're
totally.
just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And you're just like watching
Yeah, I
it.
love that. I mean, LA has like like this place called Casita del Campo, which is like a really fun queer like Mexican restaurant where it's you don't go for the food, you just go for the atmosphere, and the margaritas are like watered down and just sort of God knows what's in there. But I was gonna say I had a cocktail at Bestia on our last trip there that was truly mind blowing. It really blew me away, and I forgot what it was called, but it was like rhubarb Amaro, Sardinian orange, lime juice, and simple syrup. And I don't know what Sardinian orange is even, except I imagine it's just oranges from Sardinia. But it was so delicious. Like it was one of the few cocktails I've ever had where it like stayed with me, and I wish I could recreate it. So I'm gonna investigate that.
I love rhubarb Amaro. It's a Zuka is one of them.
Okay.
Probably one of my favorites. Yeah, it's Chinese rhubarb actually, which is different from like rhubarb.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Yeah, so one of my favorite ingredients actually ended up in the Remington Spritz, which is one of the drinks that I produce.
Okay.
And yeah, you'll actually, yeah, I love that. I love rhubarb and Amaro.
Wait, so tell us more about the drinks you produce because I saw that on your website. So you have a company?
Yeah, so I started a company basically like a couple of years ago. Even though we launched the kind of full line of drinks in the middle of the pandemic in July of last year. The company, it's called Proto. And then I have two, kind of entries in the line so far. Remington Spritz is kind of like I said, it has Chinese rhubarb with hibiscus, gentian, which is another very common Amaro ingredient, chamomile, strawberry, and champagne vinegar. And then the other one is sort of more on the like rich, not rich, but like kind of more intense and like savory food pairing end of things, called Ludlow Red. And it's got blackberry, black pepper, roasted dandelion root, fig vinegar, licorice, rose,
Wow.
and blackberries. Yeah, fig vinegar. I said that.
And are they meant to be just like poured over ice and drinking straight, or do you mix them with something?
They sort of function. They have a similar kind of like usage as you would a wine, in that they're kind of just out of the refrigerator or a wine chiller or whatever, like 30 to 40 degrees into a wine glass, and that's kind of it in terms of just like what you need to do. As a bartender, the idea of selling something to somebody that they then had to do additional work in order to get to the optimal point was just not an option for me. So
Right.
it definitely ready to drink was where I wanted to go. I wanted to be able to transmit this like idea, completely. So if they're ready to drink, maybe some ice if you want. People mix it, alcohol, no alcohol. It sort of can do a lot of different things, but for me, it's really about creating a drink that is a food pairing primarily, that is easy to serve and has the same kind of intellectual interest and kind of culinary interest as anything else, so it's not necessarily meant to be a mimicry of any other, not like, oh, it's like wine but no alcohol, or oh, this is like gin but no alcohol. It's really just its own thing. And
Oh, so it's no alcohol?
no, there's no alcohol in it. Yeah.
Oh, I kind of like wasn't paying attention to that part of it when you're describing all the things in it. I guess I heard like
It
chamomile
sort
and
of
I heard
incidentally have no
vinegar.
alcohol. It sort of
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
by accident because I was just playing around in my kitchen, and very rarely do you have the sort of like a neutral alcohol to play around with. And
Yeah.
for me, the non-alcoholic drinks were always interesting to me because in the beginning, really there wasn't really a lot of options for people. Like 10 years ago, if you walked into
Sure.
BT and you asked for something with no alcohol, you'd be like, Diet Coke, like sorry.
Yeah.
And so I always thought that was a missed opportunity for a lot of places, and still is. If you go to the fancy bars right now and you ask what's on their non-alc list, they'll like to scratch their head. And or be like, hey, we have orange juice and seltzer, and it's like,
yeah,
thanks.
exactly.
So from as a hospitality professional, that was always really important to me to be as accessible and available as possible. And also from a technical perspective, cocktails, drinks with alcohol in them have a lot going for them, aside from this sort of the psychological and physiological effects of drinking alcohol, which people generally regard as pleasurable. It's a great substrate for flavors, so it dissolves things more readily. It's a preservative. Compare if you put a black tea in cold water, it's not really going to do much. But if you put black tea in alcohol, it's going to be black in 10 minutes, because of the extraction properties of alcohol and the solvent capabilities. So if you don't have that physical thing to rely on, it's really tough to make drinks that kind of are on the same level. So I think it's why a lot of bartenders kind of avoided that for a while. And so for me, it was a technical kind of personal, professional challenge to be like, oh, I'm going to handicap myself and try to pull off something that's on the same level.
And do you sell it online or do you sell it in stores?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So people who want to find it. Yeah.
It's proto is spelled, it's like prototype is how you say it, but it's Proteau.
Okay.
Basically sounds a little bit more drinkable than Proto. And also we're we're in the Momofuku restaurant in LA. We're about to be for sale in Canada, which is really surprising. I didn't think that would happen so quickly, but got lucky. And yeah, online. And there's also tons of bottle shops that are popping up all over the country, just like specifically catering to non-alcoholic products, which would have been impossible even 2 years ago. Like you wouldn't be able to buy enough things to have a whole store. But now you can walk into a store. It's real. Yeah. So it's like New York City has a bunch of them, but like all over like Texas, Chicago, they're popping up everywhere. And I think it just speaks to like a lot of unmet need, both for people who are kind of like as a lifestyle avoiding alcohol, but then also I think there's a lot of people, most people who are in the middle who are like, wow, like maybe like if I could have something that was just as satisfying as a glass of wine or as a cocktail, and I could like go to the gym after lunch or not wake up and feeling groggy, like that's a really appealing option for a lot of people. I think that we're seeing that happening now.
So how has your attitude about alcohol changed over the years? I mean, it sounds like obviously you're getting to the business of non-alcoholic beverages, but for your own preference, like, do you still enjoy a drink now and again? Is it something
I do?
love?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually I love not drinking as much as I love drinking. It's kind of like it's like I could go back and forth, and I frequently do. So like my dad is a big like wine guy, and I would always like I just knew what all this stuff was when I was like 15 against my will. I was like, Dad, like so like drinking is always like a big part of like family celebrations, and it was kind of, and the wine, I think it's probably what set me up to do pretty well in the culinary world, just having a kind of a basic fluency with wine terminology and like how to drink and how to taste and why these things are done the way they are. And it's I definitely like was like to party in college and all that, and then when you work in the industry and you're just sort of around alcohol all the time, it definitely becomes something else. It definitely like it's like going back to like cooking for yourself, and a lot of like chefs and people like don't care. Like a lot of these fancy bartenders like will like at the end I rarely did like the shift drink at the end of the night because I was always interested in going to sleep. But like people like bartenders who create and serve like the most elegant and beautiful drinks and spirits and everything will like walk out of the bar and like have like 5 ounces of Fireball. You know, it's like so it just becomes like kind of this very like it is just kind of over it, you know, in a way. And so for me, it was really easy to like turn it off and on rather
Yeah.
than like moderating. And I'm just sort of like a consumer in general. Like one of if I had my if we were actually like eating lunch together, like I try to like slowly eat and I basically wolf down. I just like I'm like a garbage disposal, so I just like
Yeah.
drink and eat really fast. And so that's sort of like my overall kind of vibe of consumption is usually
Mhm.
very like bingey. And so I would rather like have 3 or 4 nights of heavy drinking per month, or like I took all of 2020 off alcohol. Like I just didn't drink
Okay.
all last year, like
I think a
just for
lot of
fun.
people did that in the pandemic just because it got
Yeah,
so
I decided to
intense.
do it
Yeah.
beforehand. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually like I do these like like my dad is Catholic and tried to make me Catholic and it really didn't work. But one of the things that kind of stuck with me was like the fasting elements of like Lent and
Mm-hmm.
Advent. And so I now do these like yearly fasts from various things. Like I did one where I didn't buy clothes for a whole year, and then one where I didn't read new books. I only found books that I'd read before to read again for a whole
Wow.
year. It was
That's cool.
actually that was so hard. That was really really hard, and actually psychologically very bleak because I like ran out of books to read, and I was like,
Oh
I
my God.
can't read anything. Like I don't like
Right.
like to read it a third time. So yeah, so it's always fun to discover like that kind of thing that you through restriction. And so I decided to do a year of no drinking in 2020. Like I decided to do it like in the middle of 2019, and I was like actually at like a New Year's party at Night Moves, and I
Mhm.
was like drinking champagne, and it was like midnight, and I was like finished the champagne, and I was done. Like I just like stopped drinking. I was just
Wow.
like, all right, that's it. Like 2020, and then the pandemic happened. And I actually had the reverse thing where when the pandemic crashed down around us, I also started a foundation to address quality of life issues for workers in the restaurant industry. And when there was the first like weekend of the like March 12th 15th, when everything was shutting down, we started a COVID fund to raise money for direct relief and for nonprofit grants and for a loan
That's so
program.
cool. Yeah.
And it basically took over me and my husband's entire life for a long time. And it was also very like, not only was it we were on calls and raising money, and like we raised $7 million since then.
$7 million.
Yeah,
Wow. Congratulations. That's
yeah, in the
amazing.
fund. Yeah, it was pretty intense. And so that's been a huge transformation. And but for the first like 6 weeks, I was basically working from like 7 a.m. until 2 a.m. Like gladly. It wasn't even like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. I was like, this is awesome. Like we're raising all this money and like responding to emails and like setting all these things that we needed to do because we were suddenly awash in money and needed to get it out the door fast. And so I actually was like, I need a way to kind of physically remove myself from this work. It was like Friday, and I felt like I was going insane. And I'm like, well, maybe if I like drink alcohol, I can like that's sort of takes I can sort of
Yeah.
like be like, okay, well, I can't work anymore because I had 2 glasses of wine.
Right.
And so I tried that for like a couple of weekends, and I was like, you know what, actually no. And so I like gave myself I like sort of experimented with drinking again because I was like, well, who knows, the world's gonna end. And like I needed to like you're not
Yeah.
going anywhere. You're stuck in your house, and you basically go from like, your couch to your desk if you have one. And um, I needed a way to disconnect, and I found that it then didn't actually do anything for me. It just made me feel like shit the next day. So
Yeah, I mean,
it
my
was
husband
an
started
interesting
making
learning experience.
cocktails like during the pandemic, and I think we're good because we're good at like self-moderating. Like, he would make one or two, and then we'd stop. But I think my friends who struggled during the pandemic were ones who couldn't stop themselves. Like, they would,
Yeah,
open a bottle of wine and finish it at night, and it's like they would feel like
easily. Yeah,
crap in the morning. So,
yeah.
um, well, that's so cool that you started that foundation. I was actually going to ask you, like, working as a bartender, did you witness a lot of bad behavior, or were you treated badly by certain people? Were the customers mostly well behaved?
Well, I was very lucky to work at a very kind of revered spot. You know, I never worked at a place where someone could just walk in off the street, like any asshole could just walk in and be a jerk. You know, it was
Yeah.
very, the crowd was very filtered, both by just the kind of place that it was, and then there's the door policy, there's the host, there's reservations. Like if you're like an impatient asshole and you just want to have a bad time and you go to a bar and they say it's going to be 3 hours until you can get to sit down, you're just going to go somewhere else. So it's usually, right. And then the people who have been waiting for 3 hours, they're like so excited to be there. Right. They like completely are like, oh my God, they're like, it's like they're in like heaven, you know? Yes. So I'm really lucky that I got, everyone was just super, they really had to want to be there in order to show up. So I got really lucky and I didn't have to deal with a lot of bad behavior at the bar. And also as a bartender, I think that it's a very great position to be physically separated from your guests.
Yes.
And then you're also in control of their drinks, so they don't want to fuck with you too much. So
how'd you cut people off before? Like, did you have to stop?
Yeah. And that was kind of, those are usually when people get cut off. I don't know. I haven't thought about like the most graceful way to cut people off in a while. And my line when I cut people off was, and this is true, it wasn't necessarily like a line, but it was like, basically like if someone else that I'm working with expresses a concern, then there's nothing, I have no choice. Like I can't be like, you know, it's fine, because if something happens, then there's like a chain of accountability where like, if you walk out the door and you get hit by a car and then your BAC is whatever, and we served you 5 drinks, when before we served you, the host or the server gave me a look and was like, are those people okay? That means I just decided to serve them anyway. So there's really just no question. So it's just like, what I would usually do is just, I would never, it never would be like a request. It would never be something that was like negotiable. It was just like, hey, this is what's going to happen. Like, we can't serve you. Like, I'm legally, I'm not allowed to serve you right now. And that's not and that's not up for debate. I don't care what you say. Like, it's just, and it's fine. Like, we've all been there, but like someone expressed a concern to me and I can't ignore that. And whether or not you're shit-faced or you've had nothing to drink, it doesn't matter to me, because that's in the past. And so you can hang out. Yeah. You can hang out, you can have water, you can have anything else. Can't serve you cocktails, you can have hot dogs, and then that's it. Like you know.
We should say, by the way, for people who don't know, that PDT is you go through a phone booth in the hot dog place called Criff Dog.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so I used to go to Criff Dogs and go to the phone booth, and you lift up the phone and then they say like, 3-hour wait. So we never waited, but one day I'll go. Well, so John, this flew by. Every podcast begins with what did you have for lunch, but it ends with what are you having for dinner tonight?
What am I having? So for dinner tonight, I'm excited tonight because it's the premiere of the first season of Survivor since
the pandemic. A lot of people I know watch that. Yeah.
So, and I didn't know about it until Monday, and I'm really excited. But I'm also scheduled to do a yoga class, and so I'm like, I have basically like 45 minutes to get out of the class and get home, and then like watch. So like, I will probably have something equally like space food dirtbaggy, where it's like there might be some like butternut squash in the refrigerator that I'm just gonna like literally microwave it. Maybe I'll have some tofu hot dogs.
Okay.
But yeah, nothing fancy.
So what do you eat when you're not feeling dirt baggy? Like, what do you cook? Like when heads of state are coming over for dinner, or like you do have to impress people, or you're trying to be fancy?
Yeah, like I always do like really over the top stuff, actually. So like it's been so long since I've had people over for dinner. I can't even remember. Well, okay, so here's an example. I think the last time I cooked for people was like 2020 June. It was my husband's birthday, and we had a picnic in the kind of like courtyard of our building, between our 2 buildings, and I made sourdough. I accidentally bought 100 pounds of sourdough on the internet.
100 pounds of sourdough?
Yeah, I just like saw 2 bags, and I'm like, sure, bag, whatever. And it was like from those restaurant supply stores that then started to do home deliveries, like Baldor.
I did the same thing with flour, but I bought like 3 25-pound bags of flour. But
That's
what do you mean?
75 pounds. That's not that much.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
not that far off.
No, I know, but you got 100% of sourdough. What does that even mean? Like the finished dough? Like when you say
No. I
sourdough?
bought flour. I bought
Oh,
100 pounds
flour,
of
flour.
flour.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then, so I got really a lot of practice at making sourdough. So I made sourdough, and then I made like the milk bar birthday cake.
Yeah.
So I like to do like recipes for that kind of stuff. Like my mom like has this like binder of like clippings from like 1969 Gourmet magazine. And so I love to like, when I'm doing like a meal for people, I'll like do a recipe, whether, you know, it's from the internet or, you know, a book or something like that, because it's sort of like it's like watching a movie or putting on a piece of music, you know, where you're like, hey, let's check out this thing that I'm like kind of translating to you, and you can kind of talk about it. But I also love to do like absurd things. Like I did deep fried époisses. That's a fun one.
Wow, that sounds very decadent.
You
So
just throw the whole thing in
is
there.
that kind of like stinky French cheese, and then did you batter it?
Yeah, I did a wash and then breading, and then just like yeah. I like to make French fries. That's always fun. Yeah, like things that are like, yeah, like or like I'll do like I used to cook New Year's Eve dinner for my whole family. Like we had like 14 people in like our 800 square foot apartment, which you can like see. It's like it's nice, but not like, you know, 14 people as tight. And so I would do like a mix of like I would get the bosom from Momofuku, like the pork shoulder, and then I would like cook like mashed potatoes and all sorts of like gingerbread houses and stuff like that. So I say that it's like, it's very like, the pattern is very obvious where it's like it's either like 0, all or nothing. Like in every aspect.
Feast or famine. It's really fascinating. Yeah, either you're like going for it or you're just like shoving a hot dog in your mouth. Well, that's really So do you feel as confident as a cook of like savory food as you do as a mixologist? Like do you feel like your food is on the same level?
I don't think I have the same literacy in terms of like the kind of authorship and reference and sort of like, oh, well, this is something that someone else did, or like here's like how a millefeuille works, or, you know, lots of kind of the more academic kind of like backstory on all this stuff. But I feel like from a technical perspective, I feel like I'm good at executing.
Do you ever pair the food that you make with, I know you don't like to do mixology at home, but if you're having people over or it's like a dinner party, like will you make a cocktail to go with the food?
I don't, maybe usually I'll do like an aperitif, like pre-dinner drink cocktail. And then I'm like a big like sparkling wine champagne person.
Got it.
So that's always for me my go-to like meal pairing is like a bubbly wine, because it's just so versatile.
That's a good idea.
And it also, if I'm serving food, like the cocktails are hard because it's a like big timing thing. So like if I'm plating and serving and having the food ready at a certain time, I don't also want to be worrying about like shaking drinks.
God, my husband is like in the kitchen, like, cause he's gotten to the point now where like he's realized that if he makes a cocktail, he can get some attention too, which is fair because I'm always cooking everything and he wants some of the limelight. But my thing is like, he like opens like 5 bottles and then like leaves them on my cutting board with like ice melting. And then it's like, I go back into the kitchen. I'm like, can you please put your stuff away? I was going to say as a farewell, or as, you know, maybe like a final gesture, do you have a cocktail? This is putting you on the spot, so please like don't stress out. But is there just like a little something that you could tell our listeners might be a good fall cocktail, or just something to like kick off the new season, or just something you're excited about lately?
Yeah, you mentioned them, and you mentioned a Manhattan, and you're also, I'm getting like secondhand anxiety about like cooking and then making cocktails and then having 2 people doing it at the same time, which is just like
it's a lot
unimaginable to me. It's a lot. But for me, like what I like, and it also, it takes some of the pressure off, is to like sandbag stirred drinks, especially now the weather is a little bit cooler and you're not looking for those like shaken daiquiri margarita drinks. So just like if I were to do a cocktail that was paired with a meal, and I'm already worried about timing of the food, I would just like make a Manhattan, make like a huge batch of Manhattans, like literally make like a 750 of whiskey, like a half a bottle of vermouth, bitters, put it all together, add the water, throw it in the freezer, and then it's just good to go. You have like a pre-batch Manhattan ready to pour. So that way you can just like, if you're pairing a stirred drink with a meal, you can just like pull the bottle out and it just works the same way you would a bottle of anything else.
Love that.
So that's a good workaround.
Wait, you said water. Is that a typical ingredient in a Manhattan?
Yeah, because you're stirring with ice, and that's how you get water into the drink. So the dilution is really important. So about a quarter of any drink's volume is going to be water, whether it's from stirring or shaking.
Because you're refrigerating or you're freezing it, so you're not putting, you're not adding ice later.
Yeah.
Oh my God. See, I'm learning so much. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time to let me analyze your lunch. And I hope I get to meet you someday in real life.
Yeah.
Likewise. Right. Well, have a great day. And thanks again.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.